Welcome to Interchange, a conversation about music and liturgy and all the in-between spaces on the journey. I'm your host, Kate Williams. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Jennifer Odegard. I always say we joined forces in 2020 when World Library became a part of GIA, and we all got to know this new sacred publishing family. And you were at the helm of World Library, in addition to working there for so many years before that. So maybe just a little bit of your background might be helpful.
Sure. Thank you for asking me to talk to you. Yeah, I started at World Library after a very brief stint at Liturgy Training Publications. I had been working in other fields, and my mom found a job posting for LTP. I worked there for about 4 years as their assistant marketing director and then marketing director. And then a position opened up at World Library Publications, and it was closer to home. I knew some of the people who worked there. It was an assistant marketing director job. I was a little scared because it was a music publisher, and I am not a musician, even though I hang around them all the time. And I started in that role, moved into the director of marketing role, and then in 2017, mid-2017, moved into being the vice president and chief publishing officer for that chapter of World Library, right before GIA.
So you always say that you're not a musician, and yet music is all over and all around you all the time.
I'm not a music maker. I'm a music appreciator, maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Takes all kinds, Jen. Yeah. We all have our gifts. And I think we have a lot of fun. I'm glad that we joined forces.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I expected on January 2nd of 2020. No, but it's been a really weird 4 years, but a very good 4 years too, in many ways.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate all of the ways that we've made so much lemonade out of so many lemons. But I have such an appreciation. I think we'll always look back on the first 3-4 years of our time together as being like super formative in like the foundation of like our new beginning together. And we definitely have a lot of fun. And I definitely asked you to be a part of this conversation. That's not always a lot of fun because I asked you to come and talk with me a little bit about grief and music, or grief and music ministry. And not always in the ways that you might expect, but some of the ways that I think you've shared your grief journey with me and with so many people was so essential in that time of like COVID and scandal. It was so essential to be with somebody who like knows what to do in a time of loss.
I'm not sure. I don't know that anyone knows what to do.
Yeah. But even like to say that is super helpful. Like even somebody to say, oh no, you're not supposed to know what the heck you're doing. Right. You're just supposed to like find the next step.
Right. I think mostly it's just do.
Yeah. So I was recounting before we began today about how I first was introduced to you, which was actually a long time ago. I was trying in my job as a music director at St. Nick's. I was trying to help in the Archdiocese start a teen choir festival. And there'd been a long tradition of a choir festival throughout the diocese. But they were trying to figure out a way to like get more young people involved. And so I maybe foolishly volunteered to help do one specifically geared towards teens. And I needed a lot of help from a lot of people that I had never met before, including I needed help with some type of branding so that we could promote this thing and market this thing. And someone said, well, you should reach out to Jennifer Odegard at World Library because she could maybe get you in touch with somebody who could be helpful. And I was like, okay, I don't know who that is. And they said, oh, okay, it might take a couple days for her to respond because I can't remember if it was your husband, Charlie, was very ill at the time, or if perhaps he had just passed. And so you were in a time of bereavement. But I did message you and you responded fairly quickly from what I can remember. And you got us this beautiful logo. I think actually Denise, who works with us now, was able to come up with a really cool logo. And that was my first meeting with you. But I had known, so this kind of like time in your life going through the loss of your husband, Charlie, has kind of been a through line the whole time that I've known you. And lots of things have, of course. So thank you for agreeing to talk with me in like a pretty public way about that time in your life. I feel like I've gotten to know Charlie by the way that you honor his life, but I also feel like I've gotten to know a lot about you and the things that have sustained you, bolstered you, broken your heart along the way. And it's just been like an incredible like bonding experience. And mostly I feel like when we have these times that we can share about grief, I'm mostly just like still and quiet and trying to give some space to something that I think is really sacred that's happening in a way that, well, sacredness for us, not any kind of sacredness that's necessarily prescribed or ritualized in the church, but there's this sacred sharing thing. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about Charlie?
Sure. Charlie and I were married for almost 13 years by the time he passed away, but we were together for 10 years before that. I had started college, had to get life started before anything turned toward marriage. And he was a Chicago police officer for most of the time of our marriage. He was incredibly irreverent and funny, generous and stubborn, and the youngest of 5 children, some wonderful siblings, and a wonderful family. And in late 2012, he hadn't been feeling well. And it was late 2012 that it got to the point where he was more than just tired and not feeling great and was in a pretty significant amount of pain right around Christmas. Fast forward to the beginning of January, there were some other weird health things that popped up. And in early January of 2013, he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Hit us like a ton of bricks. He had been to the doctor in October, had a physical, was fine. He wasn't fine, but he was fine, according to the doctor. And then the next 7 months were a very quick decline in his health. He was very sick multiple times and really by rights should not have lasted for 7 months. Just health crisis after health crisis, blood clots and sepsis and all kinds of things. But he tried as hard as he could to stay for as long as he could. And he did that for his family. He did that for me. It was, the worst day was the day we found out. It wasn't the day he died. That was bad, but that wasn't as bad. And since then, I've spent a lot of time, still do, trying to figure out where my life goes. Because that wasn't the path. Yeah. That wasn't what we expected. He was 48 when he died. I was 42. That's not young, but it's young.
It's pretty young.
It's young.
Yeah.
One of my dear friends had a baby 2 weeks later. I still had friends who were having children. I'm now, how many years? 5 years older than he ever got to be. And I was 6 years younger than him. So it was young. And the next couple of years are a bit of a blur, although certain things jump out at me all the time that I remember about them, and they're not all bad. And even those 7 months weren't all bad. There were some good things in there as well. So just past the 10th anniversary last August, which is hard to believe because, doing anything for 10 years. And it's all what I've learned over the 10 years is it's all the cliches, but more. Like I heard one today, actually, driving in, that grief is like swimming with your clothes on. And it's like, oh gosh, yeah, that is exactly what that's like. But it's also, it's not drowning. It doesn't have to be drowning with your clothes on. You're still swimming. You're just doing it in a different way with some baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I should say that we're also joined today by Nova, the comfort dog.
Yes. Which is always a good
She's
thing.
really good. She's really good for tough conversations.
Very good.
She's either trying to soak up some snuggles or trying to make you laugh. So she's a good comfort animal. Tell me more about the day you found out.
That he was sick?
Yeah.
Yeah, it happened over the course of a couple of days. Like at a certain point, you have this feeling that things aren't going to go well, although he looked fine. The day we found out, he had a blood clot in his leg that didn't make a lot of sense, but we justified it. We had been on a road trip to pick up a puppy. We brought home a puppy in the midst of his illness. Thought it was from the road trip, that maybe he was driving too long. He went in for a CAT scan because he was still having abdominal pain even after they figured out, it's a blood clot from driving. We went home from the CT scan and got a call later that afternoon from not his doctor, but another doctor in the practice saying, you need to get to the ER. You need to get to the ER now. The CT scan of his abdomen also just picked up the bottom of his lung, and there was a huge blood clot in his lung. And pancreatic cancer, I think some other cancers might as well, I'm not sure, but it causes the body to create and throw blood clots. That's one of the things it does. The pancreas is really weird. But he was tired and uncomfortable. But when we got that call, he was more scared. And his doctors were at a hospital that wasn't close to our house. It was about a half-hour drive away. But he wanted to go to that hospital where his doctors were. So I drove him there. On the way there, I said something that haunts me to this day. I said, oh, well, now we know it's a blood clot in your lung that's causing all these issues. We know it's not cancer. Great, Jen. Good job, Jen. Which, if you had known Charlie, he actually would be laughing about that. That that was good comfort, Jen. Good. And we went to the ER. His older sister, who is a nurse, or was a nurse by practice at one point, met us there because he turned to her for a lot of medical support whenever anything would happen, a broken thumb, whatever. And she met us there, and a doctor walked in and said, so you know about the blood clot in the lung? Yeah. Well, we picked up something else. And she said, I think you should sit, Mrs. Odegard. And I said no, because I was going to stop it from happening by standing.
Uh-huh.
And so I said no. And she said they found a mass on his pancreas, which the first thing I thought of, and this is such a Gen X thing to think of, but I thought of Patrick Swayze. That's what I thought of, because that's who died of pancreatic cancer, right? But I thought, okay, well, maybe it's something else. And then she got whisked away because there was some emergency brought in. And another doctor came in, and I started asking questions. And he said, well, this is really bad. And I said, well, we don't know that yet. And he said, well, there are also, with the lesions on the liver, they had also found something on his liver. It had spread. And I got really mad at the doctor and told him to leave the room. And so, anyway, he had a biopsy a couple days later. He had a nerve block done to stop some pain. He had a port put in for his chemo. And that was January. My parents moved in to our house. We had 3 dogs at the time, 2 big dogs and a puppy, which was crazy. And our Christmas tree was still up. They took down our Christmas stuff, packed that up. He was in the hospital about 8 days the first stretch. And then pretty much like every 2 weeks, he'd go back in for something. And it was just a whirlwind of 7 months of medical stuff. And then it got to beginning of August. Well, yeah, a couple days into August. And he was actually doing okay. We had been to the University of Chicago for a consultation on a clinical trial he wasn't eligible for. That was a bad day too. But then he was doing okay. He actually had been making some phone calls. He was looking into a new television for our TV room. Like, things were okay. And I came home from work. Actually, no, my mother called me at work and said that his sister had helped him from our dining room table to the sofa, which was about 4 feet away. And the way my mother said it was as if it was a involved process. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, he's really tired, Jen. He's just really tired. And I said, do I need to come home? And she said, I think you need to call and talk to his doctor. Maybe it's time to talk about, maybe there's some other support he could get. And that meant hospice. I knew that's what it meant. And so after sobbing loudly enough for my coworkers to hear through the closed doors in the office, we arranged to have a hospice nurse come the next day to meet with us. And I went home and he looked at me and he just said, "I'm tired." And 4 days later, the nurse came, set him up the next day. And a couple of days later, or during that time, his siblings, our nieces and nephews, some very dear friends, everyone got to spend a lot of time with him those last 4 days. I got to see our handsome nephews who are now grown and getting married and expecting children, standing at his bedside with their arms folded as if they were guarding him. I got to watch his brother give him a hand massage because his sister, who was doing that all along, had already left for the day. And we had 2 wonderful friends of the family who are priests who were on a pilgrimage trip whose flight landed the evening before he died. And they came straight from the airport to see him and anoint him. And they had been by his side pretty much the whole 7 months, taking care of both of us. So it was awful, but also in some ways really beautiful.
Yeah. I remember you talking very fondly of Tom May.
Yeah.
Who showed up for you guys a lot.
Every Friday. He would come over. We made sure that there was always something sweet in the house because he liked a piece of cake or something. But he was able to spend time with Charlie and have conversations that maybe Charlie would have been comfortable having with me or with my parents or with his siblings, as he was making peace with the fact that things here were coming to a close.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tom May, just for people who don't know, is a local priest. Jen's known Tom May for a long time. Even worked together for a bit, right?
We did.
Yeah.
We did. He and Father Carl Morello, who's the pastor of a couple of parishes in Oak Park where we work. No, they were there when we needed them, which was quite the gift. I always say Charlie had a stronger faith life than I ever have. And it was good for him to have someone to talk to about his biggest fear, which was that he wasn't good enough. And they convinced him that he was. So, yeah.
Wow. A man who was a devoted husband and public servant, police officer, asking that question at the end. That good enough?
Yeah.
Good Lord. But like you say, it was awful and terrible, and also some beautiful parts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I worked with, work was part of all of it. The day we got the diagnosis, the actual diagnosis, the biopsy, and all that kind of stuff, I was outside in the hallway outside his room, and I looked at my mother, and I said, "Well, I'm not going back to work." And I didn't mean today or this week or this month. I meant ever. Because when we had talked at the doctors, his oncologist, who was fantastic and so hopeful, because he was young and he was strong and he was otherwise in good health. I asked about a prognosis. My advice is not to do that.
Okay.
Never ask for a prognosis because it really ultimately, it doesn't matter.
Hey, Nova, you're not actually being helpful in this one. Hey, Nova, do you want to lay down or do you want to go to your crate? She wants you to feel better.
Yeah.
She says, I'm being silly.
I'm fine.
Hey, honey. Hey, down.
So, yeah. But I asked about a prognosis, and his doctor said they're seeing treatments that are extending life to 18 months. That's the good news, right? So I said to my parents, I'm not going back to work. Because I had decided at that point, and we were never like this. Like, we weren't one of those gooey couples. Like we worked different shifts and we worked different hours and we did things on our own. But I was convinced I was going to stare at him for 18 months. And his doctor said, well, that's completely the wrong thing to do. You need to go to work, and he needs you to go to work. Yeah, for money and insurance and all those kinds of things, but also for some normalcy. Because you can't live there. You can't live in the being sick. You can't. That's not how you function. Because he was still here. He was alive. He wasn't dead. He was here. And so was I. So I was so lucky to work for a company owned by a family who had dealt with health crises before. They were kind, they were generous. My coworkers could not have been kinder. I had a team of 5 or 6 people working for me that just kept everything going. Like they just did what they had to do. I remember my first review with my boss after the commentary that there was a real concern about what's going to happen because our marketing director's out on intermittent leave for 7 months. We didn't know it was going to be 7, but then the team just did what they needed to do. So I had that support at work as well, because you don't realize how much of a part of your life it is
Yeah.
until you need it to be.
Yeah. But it also can provide that normalcy or just something to keep pace with you,
Right.
which what I always hope. And I do think this is one of the things that the church does really well, is it helps people keep pace in the most difficult times, especially when you need somebody to. That's what ritual does best. Like, and now we're going to do this, and then we're going to hear this, and next we're going to do that. And like, you don't really know what's going on, but like, at least there's a plan for the next hour, week.
Right. And there's
month.
someone to just tell you what comes next.
Yeah.
I had the honor and the privilege and the luck to work with a bunch of pastoral musicians who volunteered to plan the music for me. And the day, I'm trying to think, actually, I think he hadn't died yet. I think my mom and I went into the office and met with some of my colleagues who had a whole list of options for me. And let me choose and let me pick what I thought would honor Charlie, what he would appreciate, but also had it in such a way that it was some really horrible days. But to walk into a room and have someone take care of you that way. And everything, even just little details of making sure there was a program and having people who could do that. Not everyone has that. Sometimes families have to put that together. But I know a lot of times it's the parish staff. It's the music director most of the time. And joked afterward that, of course, Charlie would have had the best funeral ever.
Yeah.
And it really was. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. There was a cellist and there were and things that I would have never thought of were just taken care of.
I think you told me this actually, because I actually know the cellist. Michael Doyle, right?
Yeah.
A good friend of mine.
So, yeah. So, the music itself, the execution of the music itself, the organization of everything. I walked out of church and there's all kinds of police officers in uniform and there's all kinds of things, but people commenting on just what a beautiful send-off it was for him.
Which church was it?
So it wasn't our parish, but it was at St. Giles in Oak Park. Because of Father Carl Morello was the pastor there. It was in a good location for everyone. It was big enough.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because it was super well attended.
Yeah. There's the police officer thing and
Yeah.
Big family and
wow.
all of that.
Did he have any plans for his own funeral, or was that all up to you?
Not really. Again, disorganized. Like you don't always think when you're in your 40s that you need to have that figured out. And it was a really difficult thing to talk about too, at least him and me. He had those conversations with other people. I was able to look at an iTunes playlist. There was some music there. But no, he didn't necessarily have it planned. And although I do think it's a gift if someone can have everything lined up and everything perfect, but I also learned firsthand that you don't need that. Because again, the community is going to rally.
Yeah.
Even a small community is going to rally around you. And it's great to have everything figured out, but even if you don't, it gets figured out.
Yeah.
It gets figured out.
I'm curious, how important were the words that day?
The words of
the words, like either the words of the prayers or the words spoken by the presider or the words of any of the music. I'm curious because I don't know what it's like, but I would imagine so much of that just washes all over you. And is it easy to recall the words of that day?
I recall actions more than words. I recall the music being just beautiful. Yeah. Really beautiful to the point where I was like, oh, this is really good music. Oh, wait, I'm at this funeral. A little bit of that. The preaching was very good because he was known. Yeah. And that helped. And just other actions of people being supportive. His coworkers lining up to honor him. Those types of rituals. Going to the cemetery. Even just the drive to the cemetery, because the cemetery wasn't real close. The ritual part of it. I remember those things. I remember my little niece knowing I was sad and at the cemetery picking up a rock and handing it to me. That rock's still in my car.
Oh, wow.
Just those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reminded of that. I think it's a Maya Angelou quote, like, you might not remember what someone says, but you'll remember how they make you feel.
How they make you feel, right.
I do actually think music is a big part of that because it makes you feel. You feel a certain way. And at those crucial points in life, you remember how you felt.
Yeah.
Maybe who alleviated the hard feelings and who...
Well, it's the soundtrack. That's what it is. It's the soundtrack to those big moments. But it's also the soundtrack to the little stuff, though, too. The every Sunday soundtrack.
Yeah. What kind of music did Charlie listen to?
Oh, all kinds of things. It depended on either what stage in his life, but also where he was. So when he was in college, he was a big fan of kind of R&B soul music. When we would go on vacations to the northern woods of Wisconsin near the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, it was country music because he was in his truck.
It's a soundtrack.
In a boat.
Yeah,
it was a soundtrack. When he was with his best friends, his brothers-in-law and such, was Guns N' Roses or Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train or something like that, but that was with that group. I had a conversation with one of our nieces at a little celebration before her wedding, and she was asking me the same thing. And she was like shocked because the only music she knew was, but didn't he and my dad go to a Guns N' Roses concert? Like, wow. How did he would have liked this that we're listening to here? She was a little bit more into country at that point, pop country. And we were in Wisconsin at the time. So I'm like, no, but up here he would have liked this. And over there he would have liked that. So wow. Pretty wide array. Yeah.
And how it allowed for and gave permission for and even celebrated different parts of his identity and different communities he's a part of.
Different relationships and different times. And
did he have a favorite church song?
That's a good question. I don't know. He probably a lot of the same stuff that would have been sung in the 80s, but he also liked a more serious, studious kind of approach. So a Latin hymn would have probably appealed to his heart.
Yeah, because I don't think you mentioned yet he was discerning seminary for a while.
He was before me, way before me. Didn't know me.
You didn't steal him.
I did not steal him. No, he was doing that. We also joked about him becoming a police officer because of the dark uniform, the leadership power over a community. That there are a lot of former seminarians who've become police officers or other kinds of public servant.
Like a helping position of some kind. Yeah. Do you have a favorite church song?
I don't know if I have a favorite one. I love there's all the Christmas ones. Always was watching a movie yesterday that had a German rendition of Silent Night, which I don't know. I just love that. No, it's hard for me to pick because I have now worked with two different sets of composers, artists. So in a way, I'm a little bit like Charlie. It's like at that moment. And I've been lucky enough that I've had pieces of music dedicated to me, which just seems like, am I worthy of that? So those have special places in my heart, instrumental or a song. So it's hard to pick a favorite child, if you will. And I'm so in awe of the people who can create that music.
Well, one of those songs dedicated to you, I wrote because I wrote a setting of the Beatitudes. It's an Adam Tice text, but I wrote a setting of the Beatitudes when we were right in the middle of the muckiest part of the muck of those first couple of years. There's so much muck. Adam came up with just this very simple but powerful text, and I got to be lucky enough to find a tune for it. But the whole time writing it, all I could think about was you, because I don't know how we would have gotten through 2020, 2021.
You would have gotten through it.
Well, maybe, but I'm glad that we got through this way.
Okay, I'll buy into that.
Yeah, because I think that we will, I think I've already said this, but I think we're going to look back on that time as just being incredibly formative. And I just remember, of whichever crisis we were dealing with at the moment, there was just this overwhelming cloud of grief and anxiety. So many losses, trying to reconcile so many losses all at one time. I think we're still unpacking that and probably will for a while. It's just one of those like defining times. And I felt really grateful to be able to walk through that time with somebody who had some kind of language for grief, like some kind of language for, and now we do the next thing, and then we'll do this. And whether it's just a random anecdote or it was something that you would think through, like sometimes you would recall times in your darkest parts of life. And even if it was just in the sharing of it, I think we were doing that thing, like helping each other, like keep time and pace through the days that were the hardest days, through our sharing and through our mutual venting and through just voicing despair together and showing up for each other so that we knew we weren't alone in the midst of it. And Adam's refrain text for this song is, you should rejoice and be glad because heaven is coming, in whatever way that means. And so when I wrote the song, I, of course, wanted to dedicate it to you. And I was so excited to show you and just excited that for the whole thing, I don't have a lot of published music, but excited that Adam trusted me with the text, and glad to have something to sing. That's my thing, is to sing something. That's how I keep time by myself or with people. And this hymn went into Gather 4. And I remember you telling me you were so excited when the hymnal showed up at your house. But maybe you want to tell this story because it's just magical, and like I'm speechless about it still.
Yeah. Well, while you were talking, I was thinking about how much of our tradition, our faith, is passed along. Because some of those phrases and things that I used were given to me. I can come up with good things. I'm pretty good with words. Written, spoken. But we're just going to do the next thing. The author and podcaster Glennon Doyle do the next thing, one next thing at a time. My dad actually gave me some of that advice. So when I asked him, how am I going to do this? He's like, well, you're going to do it the way you've done everything up till now. So just keep doing that. And I'm like, but I don't know what that is. He's like, yes, you do. Just do it. You know it. Or my dear friend Carrie telling me, when I'm saying, do you think he can be okay? And she's like, well, we don't know. Nobody knows. And so some of those things, like how are we going to get out of this? I don't know. Nobody knows, but good things can still happen. And they may not be the good things that we think they're going to be. So a lot of the wisdom that we have, the comfort that we have, are those oral traditions passed along. They're other words. They're the words of Scripture. They're the words of songs. They're the words of people who help us. So in this particular case, this was just one of those moments. And I had one over the weekend too, where you get these glimpses of things making sense in a way that is beyond coincidental. So that's that thin veil stuff about that we're seeing a picture that is much bigger than any of us can comprehend, but we get to see glimpses. And this was one of those glimpses. I had a copy of Gather 4 from the blessing when they were all blessed, when they first came in.
Yeah.
It was sitting on my end table, and my parents had come over for dinner. My dad saw it on the end table, said, what's that? Because unlike a lot of our colleagues, I don't have hymnals all around my house. And I said, oh, this is Gather 4. It just came out. I got it from the blessing. Isn't it pretty? Just as an aesthetically pleasing book. And then I said something else about, you had just recorded a demo, I think, of the song. And that came up. And I played the sound file for my parents, and my dad said, "Oh, what an honor, isn't it lovely?" And my mother's like, "Oh, people who have that kind of talent." And then we went about our evening. They went home. And as I was cleaning up oh, look at the pretty book, and hey, this beautiful song, I actually had to look in the book to see if that was in the hymnal. I wasn't sure, hadn't memorized the contents, and I went flipping through it, and I opened it up, and it was number 814, which wouldn't mean anything to anyone, but Charlie died on August 14th of 2013. And so I stood there for a moment thinking, well, wait a second. Like, Kate's wonderful, and I love working with Kate, and I think our lives have intersected for a reason and all of that. But, like, I know how hymnals go together. Like, there's no way that this song that Kate dedicated to me, that she put on 814 and then made the staff work around it. It's not how that works, right? Mm-hmm. But I did have that moment like, well, what? It's just an 814. That's crazy, though. And so when I reached out to him, like, did you know what number it is? And you're like, no, what? And I think it was just an example to me. It's, again, one of those little glimpses of, no, I don't think What Remains of Charlie interceded to have Kate Williams write a song that ended up in Gather at 814. I don't think that's how things happen. But I do think, and I see it all the time, saw it a lot the first 2 years after he was gone, a little less now, that there are these moments that remind us of the bigger picture. And those moments happen because of people. So it's not that happened, but what that reminder was is that even though he's not here, there are other people here. That it's not, that him being gone doesn't mean I'm alone. And so it happened. So it wasn't that you put it at 814, but it was the fact that we were able to meet, that we were able to work together. You were able to create something. You were able to create beauty and art as a bridge between us. And that, to me, that's what points to something greater.
I have goosebumps all over, even again now, just like you did when you first told me that. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. So it's when you're in the hardest moments, whether it's death, I mean, obviously that's a big one, but any of those hard moments, that's when I think it's so easy to think you're by yourself. But whether it's the hymn at church or it's the coworker coming and helping you do something or whatever, I think those are the moments where it's less important of why did this happen and more about the things that remain.
It's so beautiful. So important to tell these stories. I think it's so important to tell these stories because when I shared it with Jeff's the guy who puts our hymnals together. And Jeff is like anybody who knows Jeff, such a wonderful guy, just very like detail oriented. He's a taskmaster person. Like he's just very like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like fastidious and like.
Yeah, and efficient.
And efficient, dedicated to his work. But I told Jeff that story. And he was floored. he couldn't believe. And all of us who get to be a little piece of the puzzle of the story feel like active players in like a little bit of beauty.
Yeah.
And a beautiful story that we could never tell by ourselves.
Right.
No,
right.
no one of us could do this alone, but because of those like just incredible seen and unseen encounters of the bigger picture. I just think that's so important. And I do think that like sharing this and allowing those types of stories to be as contagious as possible, go as far as they can, like it plays a little part in healing. I think in healing by just recognizing like our humanity in it all. Like humans did this together.
Yeah. And the patterns, like, this is going to be a bad metaphor because I'm not a musician, but like a single note, one little note doesn't do much.
Yeah.
It's a little sound, but it's all of them together. It's the orchestra of it all. It's the ensemble of it all. It's the multiple notes on the page, and it's the silences between the notes and all of that makes sense. Even if the notes on their own or the spaces of their own or the missed something on its own doesn't make sense. That's where I think it starts to make sense. And it's all the people around who are creating those things, creating that art, creating that connection to something bigger and greater, and maybe exposing some of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's there, but you don't necessarily see it.
I know. And what made sense for you, it only gave me goosebumps because you told me about it.
Yeah.
And I got to feel like there was a bigger story
right
out there, and just how cool to be a part of that bigger thing, that thing that's bigger than any one of us and all of us put together. And
I've had this conversation with other friends, other colleagues. One of the biggest lessons, I think, whenever there's loss, is that sometimes things end. They just end. It doesn't mean everything's ended. It just means that thing has ended. But that's also those gaps that make the notes make sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's incredible. I'm reminded too of this documentary called Grief Walker.
Yeah.
Oh, that thing just haunts me. It just haunts me because I think it's something I'm supposed to carry with me. It's a documentary. It's free online. Anybody can watch it. And it follows this palliative care chaplain named Steve Jenkinson, who lives in Canada. He still does a bunch of work regarding healing and just an understanding and acceptance of life. But he has some really poignant words of wisdom about death. And one of the things he says is that the cradle of your love of life is the fact that it ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like how much more deeply are we able to appreciate and treat with preciousness any one thing, because we know that it's not forever. Well, this is forever as we know it, at least. None of it is forever. And so how are we going to treat it and honor it with the time that we do have? The most of it in the time we do have. But he's also very passionate about encouraging people to love the end just as much as you love the life, because the end is there. It's a part of the person.
Right.
It's going to happen.
Right.
And in grossly unfair ways, for some people, it happens way too soon. But loving a person means knowing that there's an end.
Yeah.
And knowing that somehow, miraculously, marvelously, helps you appreciate their life so much more. It's just here for a little while. We're just all here for a little while. And I think about that like with Jesus too. How many of us during his life, I think certainly people did not, we killed him. But all he was trying to say, I think his whole life and ministry was like, this thing that we're doing together on this planet, like we got to do the best that we can while we're here, because it ends. Like even I will die. And then we'll have a conversation about resurrection and afterlife and everything that means. But like this ending part, it's going to be really hard. And you'll want to know that you did your best up until that point, and that you have just absorbed everything good about another that you can by the time that you're here. And that's true about music too, right? Because like even your favorite song, what is it, 3-4 minutes?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it's over. But while it's happening, it's like your whole body feels it.
Right. It
You're
transcends
enjoying it.
those
Yeah.
3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you think about it later. And then the next time you think about it, you remember not just how it makes you feel, but how it made you feel that first time you fell in love with it. And that way, I think this is actually akin to some Jewish theologizing, but it doesn't die as long as you remember it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really die. What a paradox. This is not how you wanted it to be.
No.
And at the same time, it is amazing the multitude of layers of beauty and life that have shown up in the wake of such a terrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's never that simplistic thing of, well, everything happens for a reason, because if this didn't happen, then this didn't happen. Then it's not that. It's not that linear, or there's a reason for it. There was no reason Charlie died. He died because he had some bad cells in his pancreas that he was probably predisposed to, maybe from some lifestyle choices, but mainly from genetics.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't do anything to deserve it. He didn't do anything to not deserve it. It just is. But there are things that happen, like you said, in the aftermath, or that happen not because of, but after, or continue to happen. I had a conversation with my niece. She was very young then. It was about maybe 2 years after Charlie died. We were at the Art Institute, and we were looking at a Monet, I think it was, and it was all these little dots. And she had learned, she was maybe 8, and she had learned that the images were made of just little dots of color. But then when she said to me, "Oh, did you know this is just lots of little dots?"
Mm.
And we walked up really close as we could get, and looked at all the little dots. And then we stepped away, and I'm like, and look at the big picture.
Mm.
And something made me say to her, that, Caroline, this is what life's like.
Mm.
Like, you see only the dots when you're really close to it. It's only when you back up. So someday there's the big picture. We're going to see the big picture. And I really believe that. And I think all of it is part of the big picture. But Charlie's death didn't play a role in a story, but there's more than just that. There's more surrounding it.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of people, the number of relationships that have, some have gone away, but that have grown. You have this fear, oh my God, I lost my spouse. We didn't have children. Like, boy, I'm going to be by myself. Oh my God, I have so many more people in my life than I thought I had. So, and those things keep growing.
Yeah.
More people keep getting added on. So the picture just keeps getting more and more revealed.
Yeah. That's important to me too when I think about my daughter, who's 7 now. If things go according to the natural order of things, one day she will bury me.
Yeah.
And it's so important to me that she have this community around her to carry her and to point out the beautiful parts.
Yeah.
And to sit with her in the sad parts. And it's so important to me to do everything that I can do to make that community as big as I can for her, and to make it as just accessible as possible.
Yeah.
To make it as, I want to say, don't, and I won't be here anymore to say it someday, but I want to say, don't forget to tell her about, don't forget to tell her about noticing what stage the moon is in at night, because that'll come back again, and this life is a cycle. And don't forget to tell her about that. Don't forget to tell her about the ways that I tried to love her, because I worry.
But all along, you're also teaching her to build that community for herself.
Yeah.
Whether it's with her friends or with people that you know in your life. That's, because you're leaving her not only with people, but you're leaving her with knowing how important those connections are.
Yeah.
And those two things have to go together, because you can be surrounded by a whole bunch of people, and if you don't want them around and you're not open to them being there, that's it. So it's both of those things. It's teaching her to be open to that too.
Yeah. And I think
and to seek it.
Yeah, I think that's where I get sometimes a little frustrated by church life too, is that when it gets too much about the rules. and living in accordance with the rules and missing those little glimpses of big picture that fall by the wayside when you're trying so hard to just follow the rules. Because I do think, even in the times when I'm angriest at the church and want to be emancipated from this thing I inherited, I do think actually this is a thing that we can do really well. We can do this community thing really well. We can do this lifting each other up thing really well. We do this memory thing really well. Like almost in a defiance. Like we are absolutely going to remember this, whatever this is, to the fullest. And we are going to take from it the most beautiful parts that showed up despite our own, despite ourselves. All this beautiful stuff showed up. I want that church.
Yeah.
For my daughter,
and
too.
ultimately, isn't it what it is the church is? It's just people.
Yeah, it's people.
I mean, it really is just people.
Yeah.
It's all people trying to do things the way they, within a construct, to do things the way they think is best. And sometimes I think it's when people forget the other people that it becomes the problem.
Forget the humanity part of the people. Yeah.
Because the only way, I mean, like when Charlie was so sick, really, truly the only way I got through it was the other people, be that the doctors or the really good nurses who treated us like normal people, not just as patients, or my coworkers, or his siblings, their spouses, their kids, my parents, my sister, my friend. Like, it's just the people. Do we all look at it the same way? Did everyone agree with the decisions we were making or not making? Or like, no, but that's the reason I didn't feel abandoned completely by God was because there were all these other people being that.
Showing up.
Yeah. Being the hands and feet. That's really it. And sometimes like letting me be mad.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just did stuff that annoyed me so that I could be mad at that rather than something else. All those little dots make more sense. I don't have it figured out. Dots don't make sense to me completely. But there are moments that they do.
I think I'd be more concerned if you did have all the dots figured out. I don't know that we're supposed to.
I don't think so either.
Supposed to be kind along the way of figuring it out.
And notice them when we do.
Yeah.
Like try to notice them.
Yeah.
Just try to notice them.
There's one more story because, of the people who show up for you, who showed up then and who still show up. There's one more person that I've gotten to know a little bit because I know you, and it's your mom.
Yeah.
And your mom told me a story about Charlie at the end, which I'm sure she's told you 1,000 times, but it haunts me in the way that a good song haunts me. And you'll probably have more detail in your recollection than I do, but she said there was a time at the end when she was on Charlie duty.
Yeah.
She was home with him, and it was very much towards the end. And she noticed him staring out the window. And she was trying to check in with him, and he wasn't like super talkative at that point. And he was staring out the window, just staring. And she said she turned around and he had this look on his face. And she said, "What are you thinking, Charlie?" And he said, "Oh, Pat, it's beautiful." And I don't know if that was the last thing that he ever said to her, but it was definitely.
It was, yeah. It's beautiful. I mean, he said it's amazing.
It's amazing.
It was those were the last things he said to her. Yeah.
What an amazing cliffhanger.
Absolutely. Yeah, the last things he uttered, it does now. I'm probably going to really cry because I'm a little teary. But yeah, those words to her of "it's amazing," whether that meant what he was seeing, what he was anticipating, what he had experienced, I don't know. And the last words he said to me were, "I love you so, so much." And those two things together, that's what I think we should all hold on to. Not this romantic love story stuff, whatever. but about a relationship here And then what's next?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, goosebumps again.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what it feels like. What's next?
I'm not, trying to say that Charlie was some kind of prophet or any of that. But I do think, though, everyone has those stories.
Yeah.
Of even if it's different, even if the last words were different, or there were no last words, or there was one person by someone's bedside or nobody at that moment or whatever. But I do think there are those two things that we can see in life's toughest moments.
Yeah. Ugh, it's just so beautiful. And I'm so glad, to be in this business of musicking and making music and the people who make the music, and ultimately those things, I think, in tandem, certainly for me and maybe for everybody, are the things that are just gonna accompany us all the way. Just that's what church work is supposed to be.
It's supposed to be that. Yeah.
Showing up and taking us.
And we can make it that.
Yeah.
Whatever role we play, we can do that.
Yeah, we can. We have some incredible power to do just that. I'm so grateful that you said yes to having this conversation with me. I'm hoping that you can just pray with me a little bit before we go. Thank you very much, Jen. And in our tradition, we always begin in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. God, the creator of all life, we know that you were there in the beginning. You will be there at the end, and you are there with us every step of the way, and we are so grateful. So grateful for those tangible moments and those real life people that are right in front of us all the time, reminding us of the truth of your closeness, your nearness, and of your desire for us to treat each other with a preciousness, knowing that what we have here is just for a little while. But we will always have you. Keep us mindful of this. Stay with us. Be with all those who need you, and let us be where you need us to be. We ask all of this through your Son, who came and lived and died and rose again as one of us, fully human and fully divine. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. So thank you again, Jen. Loved this conversation so much, and all the conversations that we have. And this is another episode of Interchange, where we shared ideas and experiences, and hopefully a hope-filled embrace of all that has been and all that might be, as we continue singing our lives back to God. This is a podcast brought to you by GIA Publications. You can send your wonderments to us at GIA and give us a follow so you're always a part of the conversation.